Welcome to the Science of Kindness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Culver, and I'm so grateful that you've joined us today. We share real stories and give you tips, tricks, and strategies to fit kindness into your life. Enjoy and know that you are a bright light in this world. Welcome back to the Science of Kindness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Culver, and I'm so grateful that you're here today. I hope you're having a great day, and I hope all of this finds you so well. I want to start off today telling a story that was recent in my life. So just a couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to serve as the keynote speaker for a district Rotary event in Michigan. And so as I was joining my connecting flight in Dallas to go into Detroit, I was seated next to an individual and I asked them, "Are you headed home? Are you here for work?" And they shared they were headed home, but they actually lived in Canada. And I said, "Wow, you're flying into Michigan to go to Canada?" And they said, "Yeah, it's just across the border, about 20 miles from when we land. It's going to save me time. It's going to save me money." And so I often fly into Michigan. I was like, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't realize I was so close to the Canadian border. And now, mind you, I had never been to Michigan or even this part of the United States before. So as I landed in Detroit, I got my rental car and I began my 2-hour trek to the venue up in the area where I was speaking. And it was on this nice lake area. And it was the day of the event, and I had walked downstairs, and I was meeting everyone, and I was introducing myself, and I was talking to everybody, and I met the lady who had coordinated me to arrive and to be there. And so I was sharing with her that story. I said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize when I was flying into Michigan how close I was to the Canadian border." And she shared with me that if you get off Highway 75, you can end up in Canada when you really think you're going to Detroit. And in that moment, we laughed about it. And then I went on the stage and I gave the keynote, and I was grateful for the standing ovation and the opportunity to express the science of kindness in real time. And as I was driving back to Detroit from Bay City, the event was in Bay City right there in the area. It was gorgeous. Absolutely stunning area within Michigan. And as I was driving back from Bay City to the Detroit airport, I noticed that in my GPS, it was taking me a different direction. But I remembered in that real time that she told me if you get off Highway 75, right, you could end up in Canada. So I checked my location immediately, recalling that conversation that I just had with her moments ago. And sure enough, I was going the wrong direction. But here's what actually hit me in that moment. I would have kept driving had I not been listening to her in that moment, had I not been paying attention, had I not been giving my most sacred gift, my attention, to her in that respective moment when I was sharing a story, and then in turn she responded with a comment that not only was applicable to the conversation we were having, but also was going to be in disguise a token, a nugget of information that I was going to need. You see, because if I would not have been listening to her, I could have kept driving confidently in the wrong direction. And I've done that before. You can ask my partner, Kelly. One time we were coming back from Dallas and I typed in the wrong address and I drove 3 hours to Katy, Texas, rather than 3 hours to Oklahoma City. And so it's easy. You can be confident in driving that direction, right? And so the more I thought about this moment where I was assessing the GPS in Michigan, mid-highway, shifting lanes and all the things, I realized that this really is not just a driving story. This really isn't just a moment of understanding or being present and being in the moment. This really is a life story. A lot of people, even you right now, may be moving super quickly with your life, right? Things are super busy. You're overproductive. You're scheduled out from morning to sunset. You are performing at the highest capacity possible. And here's how I know that. 70% of Americans are living in a chronic state of stress. That means 7 in 10 people right now are living in a chronic state of stress. And when we are in stress, right, we are always thinking and we are consumed, which means we're not paying attention. And when we are scheduled, we are busy, we are performing and not paying attention, those things are not synonymous. They are not the same thing because we live in a world that's competing for every single second of our life with notifications, with multitasking, with emails, with constant stimulation, with social media, with noise, and the list goes on and on and on. And so over time, we stop noticing things. It's not because we get unintelligent. It's because our attention is so fragmented with all of the things that are happening within our life. Think about how many times you have done any of these things recently, right? So for example, think about how many times you've walked into a room and you forgot why you even walked in there. Or think about how many times that you read something and you had to reread it and reread it and reread it, and you still didn't understand what it was saying. Or think about how many times you listened to someone while thinking about something completely different. Or think about how many times you drove somewhere and barely remembered the drive. Or how many times have you been looking for your cell phone and you're holding it in your hand, or your keys, right? All of those things happen to so many of us. You're not alone. I've done that too. Because we are physically present in so many places, but mentally, so many of us are somewhere else because we're tapped out, burned out, maxed out, and stressed out. So let's talk about what this does in the brain for just a second. Research tells us something incredibly important. Our brain is not wired to multitask. And I know in today's time, we think we can multitask on so many screens or so many activities at a time. Actual research is suggesting that Gen Z and Gen Alpha believe they can multitask on 5 screens at a time. But also in the research, Simon Sinek suggests that we cannot actually multitask on at all. And that when we try to multitask, we just stress our brain out even more. And so we respond in this stressed out, maxed out, tapped out space. So again, research tells us something super important. The brain is not actually wired to multitask. It's wired to task switch. And every time we switch tasks super rapidly, right, our attention weakens, our accuracy decreases, our decision-making suffers, and our emotional awareness completely drops. And eventually, we stop processing at a deep level. And instead, we start skimming through life and just experiencing it. Attention is not just our focus. Attention is our awareness. Awareness is what helps us recognize when something feels off, or it helps us hear what someone is actually saying in the moments of explanation. Or it's noticing when we're emotionally exhausted or physically or psychologically unsafe. Or it's when we notice when we are catching ourselves drifting. Because here's the deal. When awareness disappears, we drift. Let's break this down into different ways in which we can see drifting in our respective life that maybe we don't even realize it. So for example, in relationships, maybe people drift in relationships slowly, right? Never because they stopped caring for one another or because they never stopped loving one another, but because our attention has disappeared. Let's talk about like phones during conversations, right? How many of us, we're sitting at our kitchen table or we're sitting at the restaurant and we're scanning our phones rather than engaging in conversation with someone? I'll be uber vulnerable with you right here. The other day, Kelly was talking to me when I was lying on the couch and he had said something. And as soon as he had started to speak, my phone made a ding at the same time. And I picked up my phone and I began to scan it, and I turned and looked at him and he said, I don't even want to continue the conversation because whatever was on your phone was more important. And I know he was frustrated in that moment because I dismissed him with my actions. I had picked up my phone to engage in that activity rather than engaging with him. And so it could have sent a signal of, I don't care, right? I'm drifting in my response of care to you. And that's not necessarily the truth. It's in a world in which it's competing for so many aspects of our attention. We discern and we forget where to discern, where to prioritize those feelings and our attention. And so let's think again. When our attention disappears when we're using our phone, or we're half listening, or we respond instead of understanding, all of that causes us to drift within our relationships. Because here's the deal. We were given 2 ears for a reason. We are meant to listen without responding, but listening to seek to understand, to ask those questions, and to always assume positive intent. And over time, if we don't do those things, connection weakens. We have constant misunderstandings that are increasing at rapid amounts, and our emotional distance begins to grow because of accumulated inattention over time. Again, these things can happen in silos, but if they compound over time and time and time again, then we begin to drift in that respective space. But that's not unique just to relationships. We can begin to drift in our professional work too. One day you may wake up and realize, I am exhausted. I am so disconnected from reality. I feel like I'm on a hamster wheel just doing the motions. I'm just doing the dang thing to get through the day. And friends, I can recall that feeling so very well. I remember one morning I was backing out of my driveway driving the Telluride, and I was about to turn right. at the stop sign right side of my house. And I was going up the hill, and I mention the hill because if anybody knows me and this house and where we live, on a good snow day when I worked in the district, I'd say if I can't get up the hill, then I can't come to work. And so I was going up the hill in the Telluride, and I was about to turn onto the main street outside of our neighborhood. And as soon as I made the turn, I thought to myself, whoa, I feel like I'm on a hamster wheel. I am miserable. This is toxic. I don't know what to do. And it's not because you ever intended to end up there, right? It's not because you ever intended to end up there. It's because you and we both stopped checking direction, because that is the biggest drift of all, is when we stop checking in with ourselves in relationship to our work, to our energy, to our effort, and to our purpose. And when we stop giving to connections of relationship, or we stop checking with our purpose and rationale for our work, then it impacts the biggest drift of all, which is ourselves. When we stop paying attention to ourselves, our body, our emotions, our needs, our alignment, we come to a space that we eventually don't even begin to recognize ourselves anymore. And I vulnerably share, when I look back at that individual who was driving the Telluride, it's definitely not the same person who's sitting behind the microphone today, right? Because life is all about evolving and growing and recognizing and understanding, right? But we have to make sure that we're making choices that are not competing with things that are trying to take our attention. We have to be intentional with what we're doing. So I want to pause here for just a moment. I want you to think about, where in your life have you drifted? Or where in your life are you no longer paying attention to something that you need to? Or ask yourself, am I moving intentionally, or am I moving automatically? There's no right or wrong answer to any of these questions that are being posed. It's really just to make you think. What's impacting you? What's taking your attention? What's causing you to navigate some of the things that you're navigating? And we can't have the Science of Kindness podcast without ever talking about kindness, right? Because here's the reality. Kindness is not about rushing and doing more. Kindness slows us down enough to notice what's actually happening with our respective lives. And I want to be clear, it's not that kindergarten kindness. It's not the surface level kindness. It's not niceness. It's not compliance. I'm talking about this kindness that's requiring us and asking us to pay attention to what we're feeling, to what we're navigating, to what we're walking through, but also to be present. Right? Be present in the moment, because had I not been present in the moment when I was listening about Michigan and Canada, friends, I could have made the wrong turn and ended up in Canada. And I'm not certain that my passport was in my backpack to get me across the line, right? The other thing is that kindness asks us to listen deeply, not just to other people, but to ourselves as well, and to ensure that we prioritize ourselves and that we're constantly aware of what we're noticing, and what we notice matters. Because in totality, when we were talking about alignment and awareness, kindness is really awareness in action. Because you cannot be deeply kind while being deeply distracted. Because kindness requires presence, it requires observation, and it requires intention. There was a 2026 kindness research study done with 20,000 people and 2,000 plus acts of kindness, and there was one clear finding. Kindness was never measured by sacrifice. It was measured by benefit, which means that even in the hard times, that when someone chose kindness for themselves and for other people, they always remembered that. So kindness means that we are present, we're observant, and we're well-intended for what we want to do. And it's not that big, grandiose kindness. Sometimes it's the small kindness. It's the attention. Because when attention disappears, so does our connection. So does our opportunity to work alongside, collaborate with, or form camaraderie with. So I want to give you a couple shifts here today. Not huge life overhauls, not things that are going to be grandiose, but just a small few acts that can act as resets for you. I want you today, when you're listening to this, tomorrow, in the next week, wherever this feels applicable to you, I want you to slow down long enough to actually listen to what's going on around you, or slow down long enough to hear what someone's sharing with you, not to respond to what they say, not to respond to the circumstances or the situation, but to understand. I also want to challenge you to remove one distraction during really important moments. Put your phone down, close your laptop, pause the noise, look someone in the eye and hear them, And say that at the conclusion of the conversation, not to respond, but to let them know that you hear what they have to say. That fosters empathy. I challenge you to check your direction regularly. Ask, am I still headed where I intended to go? Or did I go a different direction I'm not even aware? And I want you to treat your attention like a gift. Because, my sweet friend, wherever your attention goes, your life follows. When we show our attention to something, it creates awareness. And when we have awareness, it creates alignment. There was an opportunity recently. If you're not aware, my partner is running for office here in the state of Oklahoma. And there was an opportunity recently to march in a parade in one of our counties. And it's a pretty small county within the state, respectively. And when we were lined up on Main Street to march down for the parade, there was a group of individuals who were standing in a circle near us. And I was standing in conversation, and they were beginning to discuss the broadband access that was available within their respective county. And as they were talking, I got my phone out and I began taking down notes because this was really applicable to some of the research that we were doing earlier. And so during the conversation, they were sharing how there was grant funding and there was access to tribal funding and how they were trying to expand reach of broadband access. And we're just talking through all these innovative and really strategic ideas. And so when we left, we shared on the social media page for the campaign and throughout some of the marketing tools that we had, some of the findings that we had found just from having an organic, honest conversation with someone. And at the conclusion of that event, we came home and we moved forward. Well, several weeks later, we got a package in the mail from an individual, and we opened it up and there was a picture. And it was a picture of that same lady who was in that circle in that small town, who shared openly how she appreciated how we were listening, how we were trying to find solutions to provide access to even the most rural and urban, suburban areas across the state, and sent some scissors as a gift to cut out some of the noise and nonsense. And so I share that story with you because how many of us could use scissors to come out some of the noise and nonsense, and how many of us could really intentionally listen to not only foster our attention to be in alignment, but also to foster our attention to be aware. Because when we are aware like we were in that situation, it created alignment to show there's unity between looking for solutions and also creating access. Had we not been listening in that moment, I'm not sure the outcome would have been the same, or perhaps we could have missed an opportunity. And so same to you. Where can we create more awareness so there's more alignment and that we don't miss those opportunities that are created for us? Because here's the deal, friends. That moment in the car in Bay City, Michigan, on my way back to Detroit, it really was never about directions. It really was all about awareness. Because the difference between being lost and being aligned often comes down to one thing. Are you paying attention? Not just to the world around you, but to yourself, to your relationships, to your direction, to your life. And if you've been feeling pulled in way too many directions lately, I want this to serve as your reminder. Slow down long enough to notice where you are today. Because kindness begins right there, with attention, with your presence, and with awareness. And remember, friend, if you can't find the light, be the light. And oftentimes the light you're looking for is the one that you carry on the inside. If this resonated with you today or helped, let us know in the comments, share with a friend who might also benefit from this message, and hey, help us spread the word. That's how the podcast grows. And don't forget, check out The Orange Sparrow's Journey at orangesparrow.org. Check out Be the Light at drchrisculver.com. And be sure to follow, subscribe, and do all the things to be a part of our podcast journey. As always, I'm grateful for you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for following along. And if you haven't heard it today, please know that I'm rooting for you, and I love you always, friend. Until next time, we'll see you soon.
The Science of Kindness podcast is hosted by Dr. Chris Culver. Our executive producer is Jake Doberens. This podcast was created in conjunction with Theophany Media.